Welcome back to the course Fundamentals of General Immunology, and we started with the module 7, and the title of the module was Mucosal Immunology. And in Mucosal Immunology we looked into what are the immune system particularly related to gut, gastrointestinal tract. Then we also look into the immune response or mucosal immunity towards the respiratory tract epithelium. So further on the same line, on the mucosal immunology, let's try to understand the genitourinary tract. That means the epithelium which are present mostly on the genital tract and the urinary tract. So we'll mostly focus on the genital tract because urinary tract epithelium, as we discussed earlier also, that urinary tract and the urinary bladder, these epitheliums are mostly transitional epithelium, which are mixture of squamous, cuboidal and columnar epithelium, and they are changing their shape and size based on the requirement, because the bladder is mostly containing the urine, and different concentration or the volume of urine can decide the heterogeneity in the cell mass population of urinary tract. So those are critically the different kind of epithelium altogether, and therefore they are called transitional epithelium. So let's focus on the genital tract immunology and try to see what are the unique things which are there both in the female reproductive system as well as in the male reproductive system. So we'll focus on the few things particularly related to the barriers which are there. These are literally lined by the skin and the mucosal surface. There are enzymes which are secreted, such as lysozymes, and lysozymes are particularly the enzymes which can degrade or cleave the cell wall of pathogen, particularly bacterial cell wall. We do have peptides secreted in those areas, such as defensin. These are antimicrobial peptides. We do have fatty acids and acidic pH. That's pretty well known that vaginal epithelium is mostly acidic in nature. Then we have cellular factors such as mononuclear phagocytes, such as blood monocytes and the tissue macrophages. We understood that there are different macrophages which are present in different organs, such as Kupffer cell in the liver. We do have some astrocyte or glia cell in the central nervous system. We also have different type of cells, including Langerhans cells in skin. So there are tissue macrophages which can engulf the particulate form of antigen in those areas. We do have granulocytes. Granulocyte stands for the one which do have granules, such as neutrophil, eosinophil and basophils. Dendritic cells, because they can process the antigen and to present them effectively to the immune cell by going to the nearest lymph node. Then we do have a mast cell, which is basically the modification of the different form of the basophils, and post activation these mast cell, degranulation of mast cell particularly can release histamines, and these are a large population of mast cell are actually involved in allergic reactions. So when we have more of the mast cell activation, we see more of the histamine secreted into the system, particularly in the blood, and we do have allergic reaction upon the mast cell activation. Therefore, to curtail those things, we do need antihistaminic tablets such as Avil. So finally we have cell which are naturally killing ability. Those are called natural killer cell, NK cells. So these are some of the cellular factors which are present in the genital tract of both female as well as in male. Apart from that, we do have cellular factors. Apart from that, we do have humoral factors such as antibody, secretory antibody such as IgA immunoglobulins. We do have a dimeric form of IgA molecule which we call soluble IgA. We do have complement protein which are typically present in the serum and also involved in opsonization or multiple other cascade in the genital tract. Acute phase protein which are produced in response to a entering pathogen or any kind of reaction that's happening in the environment, particularly in the epithelial area. So these are very important proteins which are secreted in response to deviation in the homeostasis, acute phase proteins. And then finally, we have something very important called interferons. So interferons, alpha, beta, and gamma, these are secreted in those epithelium to make the environment sterile in terms of entering external pathogens. So let's try to focus on details of the genital tract. So we will go one by one. First we'll cover the female genital tract, and then we'll cover the male genital tract. So in the female genital tract, it's a very complex organ in terms of secretions, because there are a lot of hormones which are secreted from these particular set of different organs, and also these are involved in fighting with the external pathogen, because these are opening of the human body. So let's try to focus on one by one. So we know the part wise that we have fallopian tube, which is getting the ova from the ovary, and then these are coming into this area which is called uterus, and then we do have endometrial wall, which is a different part of the uterus. Then we have cervix, and finally the end is vagina. So in the vaginal epithelium, we will start one by one with a wall and look into the immune response particularly. So in the vaginal epithelium, we do have lactobacilli. Now lactobacilli is a bacteria which is providing acidity to the vaginal epithelium, which is very important because acidic pH won't allow bacteria to survive in that atmosphere. Apart from that, we do have antimicrobial peptides which are secreted in the epithelial lining, and also mucus to make the area moist. Apart from that, we do have very tight stratified junctions. So there are layers of cells which are present in this epithelial lining. Apart from tight junction, we do have lot of phagocytic cells which can engulf the entering antigen or pathogen, such as Langerhans cells. So Langerhans cells are actually the phagocytic cells which are present here. Apart from that, we have gamma delta T cell, which is actually the T regulatory cell population, which can suppress the immune response if at all it's needed. So gamma delta T cells are also present in that area. Then we have something which is present in submucosal layer, such as dendritic cells, some of the phagocytic cells, and also different forms of the macrophages which are present in this area. Now this is an area which is radially getting the things from outside because these are exposed. Just below that, we have a thickening of the mucosal epithelium, and this thickening area is actually filled of the columnar epithelium, because these are involved in the regulation of the tightness of the epithelial wall. So we have columnar epithelium, and this columnar epithelium will have a very high concentration of CD4 positive T cell population. So try to remember this point, that females are having this particular area called columnar epithelium very rich in CD4 positive T cell population, and therefore these CD4 positive T cell population are actually site for HIV virus binding, and therefore females are susceptible for HIV infection simply because the CD4 positive T cell population is very high in that particular area, and HIV binds to CD4 positive T cell population apart from other co-receptors which are available in the cell. So just keep in mind the CD4 positive T cell population makes the female more susceptible for HIV infection, and of course we'll see a very similar kind of kinetics in the male also, where the HIV positive positivity is quite high because of the high propensity of the CD4 positive T cell population. Apart from that, we have secretory immunoglobulin A and also G, which can fight with the pathogen, toll-like receptors which are expressed in this epithelium in a very high concentration, just to give an innate immune response so that the interferons and the other innate immune sensors can be activated. So these are in the middle part, cervical part. What is happening to this endometrial wall, which is again thicker as compared to the lower side? So these are actually rich in aggregates. So these will have these particular area will have a very thick wall, and apart from that they will have a lot of lymphocytic aggregation. So you can see a lot of lymphocytic aggregation. Apart from that, we do have CD8 plus and natural killer cell. So natural killer cell is identified by CD56 as a marker. So we do need to understand that there are few markers which are very rampantly and thoroughly used in this course, such as CD4 plus, CD8 plus, and CD56 here as a natural killer cell marker. So these are some of the cells which will be aggregated in this endometrial wall, and apart from that, of course, we will have all the secretory immunoglobulins which are secreted in this part of the uterus. Now these are very distinct kind of architect which are there in the female as naturally to protect them from the atmospheric invasions. The layering is actually stratified, so they are cornified, so they have multiple layered in all this condition. So we do have a squamous epithelium also, where you have secretions involved, and we can again recapitulate the same thing, that the squamous epitheliums are the epithelium which are present where we have more requirement of secretions. Cuboidals are only present in most of the glandular part, and the columnar can provide the rigidity. So where we require a rigidity, we see that the columnar epitheliums are having a very high concentration. So this is about a reproductive tract cellular system in the immune aspect. Let's try to move on and see what is unique about the female reproductive system as compared to the male. So we do have a very unique biology which we need to understand here, and that's the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle is a series of change in the hormonal patterns in case of females that is lasting for 28 days. So what is happening is initial 4 to 5 days is actually a menstrual phase where the uterus wall is getting sloughed out and the things are washed out from the body cavity in the form of menstrual fluid, which is filled of blood and all the debris of the uterine cavity or uterine system, which is again getting rebuilt, proliferative phase where they are rebuilt again. And then in the mid of the cycle, at the 14th day, we see ovulation can happen. So the ova can be coming through the ovary to the fallopian tube in the mid of the cycle. And then post 14 days, we are maintaining another 14-day cycle to start again the next phase of the menstrual cycle. So this 28 days is actually very well decorated in terms of the cellular component, because before that we have a bleeding, and then after the follicle will mature to get an ovulation at the day 14, and this ova can sustain up to 28 days. Now what is unique about the hormonal level? So in the menstrual phase we do see that there is no hormone as such fluctuating. But immediately after menstrual phase, we have a very high concentration of estradiol. Now estradiol is something which is required to proliferate, and therefore the estradiol phase will be having a proliferation stage. The cells will proliferate, the endometrial wall become thickened so as to sustain the ova for possible case of pregnancy. And therefore these hormone is very critically controlled, and after that we have a secretory phase where the estradiol along with another very important hormone called progesterone is coming into picture. Now if progesterone is present, then probably the follicle will be sustained into the uterine cavity, and just in case of pregnancy this progesterone is gets elongated phase of secretion, and this can sustain the pregnancy period for 9 months, and therefore progesterone level, the level of progesterone is what is diagnosis of pregnancy. So the progesterone level is also very critical. These are some of the hormones which are depicted here, such as follicle stimulating hormone, which are responsible for follicle development. So the follicle is one which can give production of ova from the ovary. So this is responsible for ova or egg production. In case of female, LH is actually a luteinizing hormone which can cause rupturing of the ova so as to release the ova from ovary. So LH is important hormone, and also you see that the LH is getting peak just before ovulation. So the LH level will be very high in case of just before ovulation, because LH is responsible for ovulation, and after that only we see ova coming out in the reproductive tract. Apart from that, we have estradiol, very high concentration, and finally progesterone, which is always in the peak condition in case of secretory phase. Now, so these are literally the hormone regulation in the female reproductive tract. And what is happening to the immune cell is basically when we try to see the percentage of the immune cell in these, so these are T cell, these are neutrophil, these are macrophages, natural killer cell and B cell. So more or less we can see that the cell populations are mostly, the T cell population is very high in case of the, so this depicts the initial phase, the menstrual phase, and this depicts the secretory phase. So in both the phases we have a very high concentration of T cell. And in the neutrophil phase also we see cells are there, but the concentration is less, while macrophages is also less, NK cell is also very less, and B cell concentration is least. Now why we said that probably in the secretory phase and the menstrual phase will have a different concentration of the cell population is because once we see the regulations of the immune cells, we could understand that the cells concentrations are quite different in these two phases. And in terms of hormone, we always see that both the hormones are quite differently regulated when it comes to female reproductive tract. These are some of the important things about the female reproductive tract. So the points which need to be considered is the hormone and the mucosal epithelium contains different kind of subsets of the cell at different areas. We do have a very different cell in the vaginal epithelium, we have a different cell in endometrial wall, and also very different cell in the cervical area. So these all cells are making the whole area of female reproductive tract sterile. And remember, the vaginal pH is always acidic, which won't allow anything to survive in that acidic pH, and one of the causative agents, there could be multiple other agents, but one such agent is lactobacilli, which is a very high concentration in the vaginal epithelium. Now coming back to the male reproductive system, we'll try to see male reproductive system in the same way what we understood in the female reproductive system. And in the male reproductive system, we do have two parts we call penile urethra part and the testicular part. So we'll see both the immune response in a different way. In the penile urethra, the activation is differently, and in the testicular part, the regulation is different. Now we have in our opening area, we have very high concentration of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. That means they are involved in lots of secretion. Apart from that, we have macrophages and dendritic cell in a very high concentration in these particular epithelial area. And this area is lined by glans penis and the fossa navicularis, which are actually an area which can be giving an opening to outside. Apart from that, we have two very strong muscular area called corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum, which are lining of the penile urethra part. And we do have very high specific secreting cells, which are mucin secreting cells called Leiter glands, which are also containing very high concentration of antimicrobial peptide. Now coming to the point which I discussed earlier also, that we do have a very high concentration of CD4 positive T cell population, and therefore these are also a target for HIV infection, and therefore HIV is actually a sexually transmitted disease because CD4 positive T cell population is very high in this particular area. CD8 is also there, natural killer cell, other cells, other immune cells, toll-like receptors, and secretory immunoglobulins such as IgG, secretory immunoglobulin A, and also type 1 interferon. Type 1 interferon is alpha and beta. So this alpha and beta interferons are also very high. Now this is roughly about the penile urethra part, which is rich in blood vascular supply, and because of the high blood vascularity, we see always the immune cells are getting dragged towards this side very quickly. Then we do have a testicular part, and this testicular part is actually a complex structure of testis and epididymis, which is actually giving passage to the sperm which are formed in the testicular area. So these are retitestis, tunica albuginea, and then seminiferous tubule. Now these are the seminiferous tubule which are actually the site for sperm production. These seminiferous tubules are having a basement membrane which is lined by a very thick epithelial area. Then we do have a Sertoli cell, which is called nurse cell, which can give nourishment to the growing sperm, and then these are mature and immature spermatozoa which are developed in the seminiferous tubules. Apart from that, we have a peritubular myeloid cells which are producing TGF-beta2, MCP1 and LIF. LIF stands for leukemia inhibiting factor. Leukemia is blood cancer. So basically these are very specific kind of proteins which are secreted from the peritubular myeloid cells. Apart from other regulatory cells, we do have a Leydig cell which are secreting the hormone called testosterone, and these are secreted into the space to give the functionality to the male reproductive system. We do have regulatory T cell population exactly like the female reproductive tract, but in terms of the immunity, female immune response are far stronger as compared to male, and we'll see in a while why it is giving a uniqueness to the female reproductive system as compared to the male, because the quantity and quality of the immune regulatory molecules are very high in the female reproductive tract. So these are some of the things which are listed in the name wise. So AMP, which are antimicrobial peptides which are secreted in multiple places in the male reproductive system. Interferon, immunoglobulins, monocyte chemoattractant protein, this is MCP1, which can attract the monocyte so that it can start phagocytosis. So monocyte is actually a phagocytic cells. So these are the protein which can attract the monocyte towards the site in order to do phagocytosis. Natural killer cell, peritubular myeloid cell, transforming growth factor, and of course toll-like receptor which are present in pseudostratified columnar epithelium. If you recall back, we have discussed pseudostratified squamous epithelium in the nostril area. Here we have pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And then in the gland penis area we have squamous epithelium which are involved in secretion. So these are very unique immune regulatory aspect of the male reproductive system. Let's try to move on and see some unique thing about the genital tract in general. So we know that the male and the females are differentiated based on the sex chromosomes, and in the male we have XY chromosome and in the female we have XX chromosomes. So how these male and females are differentiated based on disease aspect and also autoimmune diseases. So females are actually secreting most of the time estrogen and progesterone, while in case of the male, the major male hormone is testosterone, although the structure is quite similar but the function is very different. So these are two sex hormones which are differentiating male with the female. So we can depict female by this sign and male by this sign. Let's try to understand the complexity based on the research finding what we know till date. Females are most susceptible for autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases means the diseases which are caused because of the immune response towards the self molecules. So sometimes the immune response are regulated against our own cell, and those are called autoimmunity. So the females are most susceptible, while males are most susceptible for bacterial infection, parasitic infection, fungal infection, virus infection. So in general, males are most susceptible for all kind of infection, while in case of female, the parasitic infection, the worm infection are more, the chances of getting worm infection are more in case of females. We could understand that probably the level of IL-4 and IL-5 might be regulating these issues. Apart from that, we are still trying to understand that why this heterogeneity exists in case of sexuality wise, that why a particular gender is more prone for infection, the other gender may not be. Largely people have looked into the level of hormone and their regulation, like what estrogen do in case of female and what testosterone do in case of male. So in general, testosterone is supporting the growth of bacteria, parasite, fungi and viruses, while in case of autoimmune diseases, females are more susceptible, and therefore the immune response is directed in a different direction altogether. So these are some of the deviation which are mostly based on the sexual dimorphism. Let's try to see why it is so in terms of our understanding till date. So in terms of autoimmune diseases, we just now discussed that females are most susceptible for autoimmune diseases. Why it is like that? So in females we have two X chromosomes, one is called active, the other is called inactive. and the inactive form of the X chromosome is actually called XI, and in the naive lymphocyte they lack the cytological enrichment of the XIST RNA. Now that means in the naive lymphocyte we don't see much variation, while once it is stimulated, then the naive lymphocyte can be converted into active lymphocyte, activated lymphocyte. And once it is activated lymphocyte, then we see that the XI become activated. And how it is activated is because of the presence of X inactivated specific transcript. These are actually long non-coding RNA. Non-coding RNA stands for the RNA which doesn't code for any protein. So these are the RNA which can help in regulatory aspect of the gene expression in the human body. So their production to specify the gene regulation. They don't code for any protein, but they can modulate the expression of the gene in a large extent in the nucleus. So these are master regulator, and these are actually regulating the gene silencing. So because of their activation, we see that the gene silencing can happen in case of females. So they can suppress the immune response, they can suppress the gene expression to a larger extent, and therefore we do see that they are very important moiety in the female reproductive system. They code the X chromosome in the cis fashion. That means the production of the protein, the production of the XIST specific transcript can mask only that chromosome. So that's called cis acting. That means the one which is produced in one chromosome can bind to the same chromosome. It won't go to the other one. Therefore it is called cis. If it goes to the other one, we called it trans. So the trans means the one which is going and binding to the other one, while the cis is which can bind to the self. The one which is producing bind to the self one. Therefore these are called cis acting elements. Coming to the mark which is given here, heterochromatin marks. Now heterochromatin is a very tightly packed and a highly condensed form of the DNA present in the nucleus. These are inactive area in the genome. So they are called heterochromatin because they won't produce a specific gene expression at a time. So these are very low in gene density, they have a very low quantity of gene expression, they have a very high repetitive sequences levels, they contains many repetitive sequences, and they are mostly silenced in terms of gene expression. So they don't do transcription. So DNA is highly packed, condensed, and so these chromatins are requiring some kind of modification which are called epigenetically modified structures in order to make them functional. So that means these XIST specific transcripts are very important to make the differences in the autoimmune aspect of the females. So these are regulated and causing the gene silencing to happen in case of female. These are our understanding based on the research finding till date. So what does it mean that once we have a stimulation, then these XIST mRNA, XIST specific transcripts are coming and causing global silencing of the gene expression in case of females, and therefore these are essential for balancing the X-linked doses and also the maintain structure integrity of the inactive X chromosome and throughout the cell cycle. So once the cell cycle starts, the expression of these XIST can modulate the female reproductive system gene expression, and therefore these are very, very critical in terms of controlling the autoimmune system in case of females. And now this is all about what we understand about the aspects of the autoimmunity. Why females are more susceptible of autoimmunity is simply because XI chromosome become active post-stimulation because of the conversion of huge amount of non-coding RNAs called XIST, and these are actually causing generalized gene silencing so that the important proteins are not produced in a proper way, and therefore females are supposed to be susceptible for autoimmune disease because of the high expression of XIST, which is absent in case of males. Now what does it mean that the female are susceptible? So we do have a condition where we have a different number of X chromosome. So we do have a Turner syndrome, we do have an XX female where we have more number of X chromosome. So the females are XX, and in Turner syndrome we have mosaic thing where one X chromosome is missing. So we'll see that why females are more susceptible for autoimmune diseases. Now, what is the contribution of X chromosome in there? So in case of female, normal female, we have 2 X chromosomes, while in case of Turner syndrome like condition, we have only single X chromosome. While in case of polysomy, we have another set of X chromosomes. So there are 3 X chromosomes in a cell, and therefore we have a polysomy condition. We have XY male, where we have only single X, and then we have a Klinefelter syndrome where we have XXY condition. Now, all this condition will, where the number of X chromosomes are more, will give more chances of getting autoimmune diseases. That means the proportionality, the proportion of the autoimmune disease is directly linked to the number of X chromosome. More X number of chromosome, more chances of autoimmunity in those individuals. So some of the autoimmune disease examples are systemic lupus erythematosus. Now this lupus is actually an autoimmune disease where the immune cells are generated against multiple organs and cause destruction of multiple organs, causing multi-organ failure. Sjogren syndrome is a specific condition where we have drying of the muzzle, mouth epithelial area, dryness of the upper oral cavity. Then we have systemic sclerosis where we have a thickening, hardening of the skin, hardening of the dermal area, and because of this keratinized layer is very hard. So these are all very specific autoimmune disorders. And then polymyositis stands for inflammation of muscle. So myositis is actually the inflammation of muscle. When we add poly in front of it, poly means more. So many number of muscle inflammation is what we call polymyositis. Then we have a dermatomyositis. Myositis is same, the inflammation of muscle. When we involve dermal layer, that means the outer layer, then we have a mixture of dermal as well as muscle specific inflammation. All these conditions can lead to weakening of the muscle, particularly these 2 conditions can lead to weakening of the muscles, and therefore these are a very critical condition to be treated immediately. So these are some of the response which are happening in case of females more exaggerately because of the XIST specific response, and these are generally the immune response which are generated against the self antigen or self tissue type. So this is all about the female and the male mucosal epithelium, particularly the genital tract. So we'll try to cover something else in the next class, and then we'll move to the next module and see what else is there in this course. So this is all about the mucosal immune response, which is very particular to the gut epithelium, lung epithelium, and the genital tract. We also covered the urinary tract as well, where we discussed that the urinary tract is having a transitional epithelium, which is mixture of all different kind of epithelium. But the concentration and the level of immune response is altogether the same. They can secrete mucus in a very high concentration, and they can produce an antimicrobial peptide and some of the secretory immunoglobulin in a very high concentration in these areas. So we'll see something else in the next class. Thank you.